More medications, less health. Something's broken. Traditional medicine manages symptoms, but true healing addresses root cause. I'm Josh Rimini, pharmacist turned healer. At Beyond the Pills, we merge ancient wisdom with modern day science to inspire you through stories of transformation, practical trainings, and holistic healing. Join me and other practitioners as we guide you towards vibrant health, body, mind, and spirit, and move beyond symptom management into true healing. Hello. Welcome to this episode of Beyond the Pills, the podcast where we blend ancient wisdom and modern science to explore the full spectrum of healing, body, mind, and spirit. I'm your host, Josh Rimini, pharmacist turned healer. And today's guest is someone whose work and path is beautifully aligned with that mission. Our guest today, Jason Grechanik, is a plant medicine practitioner, podcast host of himself, and a global guide in the traditional healing. For more than a decade, Jason has lived, worked, and studied in the Amazon and the Andes, facilitated plant medicine dietas and ayahuasca retreats, while weaving together the Amazonian tobacco traditions and Celtic tree wisdom into a grounded, heart-centered practice. Jason formerly facilitated at the Temple of the Way of Light, which I hold near and dear to my heart, in Peru, and now runs dietas internationally, helping people reconnect to plant spirits, healing intelligence, and their deeper selves. He is also the host of the Universe Within podcast, a thoughtful exploration of consciousness, nature, and healing. In this conversation, I hope to explore the sacred role of using tobacco and dieta in the healing practices, what we often get wrong about plant medicines in the West, and his path to apprenticeship and how he got to where he is. And so I'm really excited for this and how he can honor these indigenous traditions and creating these space for transformation. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your time and all you're doing.
Yeah, it's I saw you pop in my field and into the podcast recordings, and I think we got a lot in common because we've shared space in the same place. So that was a unique and cool, fun thing, and I feel like that's always how it works. You know, things are just meant to be the way they are. But take us back, how did your relationship with plants and healing begin?
Yeah, it's a question I've been asked a lot of times, and I think there's a lot of directions that it could be taken in. But I would say, in short, I think I've had a very varied and eclectic life. And also, when I look back as a child, I mean, there was probably two things that I was always called to. One was martial arts, and the other was shamanism. Although at the time I wouldn't have called it that. Shamanism seemed something quite far and distant away, but something about spirituality, earth-based traditions, indigenous traditions, and somehow. I found myself doing this work probably early in my 20s. I had a very deep calling to spirituality, to different spiritual practices that led me to explore a lot with plants as medicine and different traditional or indigenous systems of working with plants. And eventually I had a very strong calling to specifically work with ayahuasca. That calling probably started in, I don't know, 2009 or something. And in 2012, I found myself in the Peruvian Amazon at the kind of, as you were mentioning in the introduction, a place called the Temple of the Way of Light. And it's a quite big ayahuasca center in the Peruvian Amazon. And that experience was very profound for me. And it really began to give me insight and answers into a lot of questions that I had. And kind of from a place of just wonder and a deep curiosity, I found myself back there and ended up working there for, I think, almost 10 years. During that process, I went quite deeply into Amazonian plant medicine, a lot in the Shipibo Conibo system, but also mestizo tabaquero, a person who works with tobacco as a medicine, and just very, I think, deep into that cosmovision, that world, and slowly that became my work. Was never even something I really envisioned, but it just kind of organically began to happen. And as you said, I also have a podcast now, which similarly was to begin to kind of bring people on who I have a respect for, and to kind of give them voice. I think as this work begins to go more into kind of the mainstream consciousness, and yeah, I guess in short, or maybe not so short, that's a bit about my story.
Well, it's the journey, right? The journey we all are taking and called on. And I love hearing each people. A lot of people on this podcast have their own, special journeys towards healing or plants or moving into that mysticism of the spiritual realm, right? Looking at that place as like their calling, but also not just for their own healing. A lot of our practitioners and people that are working in the space now is, they were called to also help other people. So I appreciate that in your story. And yes, we both spent some time at the temple. I was just there last year, right around this time last year, going through my own retreat and studying with the Shabipo healers. I've got my stuff in the back here where I got from, because that's part of what sparked me. And that same thing, like you said, that was that deep understanding of not only yourself, but also this whole process. And so I really appreciate that in your story, because it was very intertwined with mine, and it brought me down this path of learning more about shamanism and certifying in different energy medicines in the shamanic ways, especially in the Peruvian kind of mindset of the medicine wheel and things like that. And so I love that with that. You carry this deep wisdom around the the tobacco, Amazonian tobacco. And so, can you share a little bit about what this particular medicine means to you, and and a little bit of why, like, I think it's a little bit misunderstood, because in the West it's like, cigarettes, and that's really bad for you and all those chemicals, but we know that there's this beautiful spiritual nature to this beautiful plant medicine. And so this is where you studied with, and you started to learn it, and you started to become that. And so, can you give the listeners a little bit of a background on the plant medicine side and the healing aspects of tobacco? Because I don't think this is one a lot of folks we're having a lot of conversations about, and I think it's an important
Hmm. Yeah, it's I grew up in the US, and ever since I was very young, I was very interested and fascinated by a lot of North Native American traditions. And it was always very interesting to me because I understood that a lot of these people had a very deep reverence for tobacco, and they spoke about it as medicine, as a spiritual being, something that could carry spirit, carry messages, carry intentions, carry prayers. And then having that kind of in a dichotomy with what I knew of tobacco, which, as you said, was predominantly cigarettes. And at the same time, I always, it may sound strange, but something about tobacco was very alluring to me. I actually never really smoked, and I actually was quite averse to smoking. But my grandparents' land used to be a tobacco farm, and there were still tobacco barns on that land. And I would remember going in and almost being intoxicated by the smell, and something about being around this cured tobacco seemed very, very different from cigarettes. And even in my travels, I ended up in a lot of places where they grew tobacco, Cuba and different places, and I would just always have that similar feeling. Then it was quite interesting for me when I found myself in the Amazon and working with ayahuasca, and kind of seeing and this use of this reverence of tobacco. And It didn't seem strange to me at all. I mean, it seemed very natural and also kind of a question of something I was looking for a long time. And I think what I really saw and respected was that these were living traditions. These were living traditions of a very deep knowledge of these medicine plants and cosmovisions of the stories, the meaning, the deeper essence behind these plants. And so, very much as you know, I mean, even the Shipibo, for example, in their ayahuasca ceremonies, they're using tobacco. I mean, when you look at most indigenous people who work with very strong plants, almost always there's some connection to tobacco. It's
Mhm.
often said that, for example, tobacco could be worked with without ayahuasca, but ayahuasca wouldn't be worked with without tobacco. And the idea behind that is in a lot of these traditions, tobacco was considered the first plant. It's why it's often colloquially kind of referred to as the grandfather plant, not necessarily even that it's masculine, but this maybe more Judeo-Christian idea of the father. And so the first plant being tobacco, the grandfather plant. And there's a beautiful story that the Witoto or the Bora people have, and they say that God, their creator God, gave tobacco to humans so that humans could dream like God dreamt the universe into creation. And there's a lot of levels to that. One is this idea that actually one way of looking at this reality is that it is a dream, and that uh, everything can be manifested, that we have that power of creation, of the creator. Also, that there are different dimensionalities, and that these plants like tobacco allow us to traverse these different realms of consciousness, or literally dimensions. In a lot of indigenous stories, they say that there are different dimensionalities. Even there's stories like, for example, the Tubu of the Colombian Amazon would say that eons ago, kind of humanity was suffering, and these higher maybe beings, interestingly from the star system Sirius, descended the 12 dimensions of time and space on this primordial anaconda canoe. And on this canoe, they brought with them all of these sacred plants, and the first plant in that canoe was tobacco. Um, Very interesting. You know, I think if you look at things even through a more modern lens, I mean, I think it's quite interesting. Some of these theories, like string theory, see uh, 11 dimensions, and often the 12th would be considered something that encases them all, or something that's beyond the what's visible. But that's probably a whole nother podcast for that. But anyway, the idea being that tobacco was a very, very sacred plant. And in many traditions, one of, if not the most sacred plant, alongside these plants like ayahuasca or wachuma, San Pedro, peyote, iboga, these plants that are considered master plants. And usually when that's being referred to, it's this idea that these plants have the ability to teach us, and they have the ability to move us between these different dimensionalities. And so, much like a plant like ayahuasca, it has the ability to allow us to see beyond the perceived world. And so tobacco is one of those plants that allows us to do that. Each of these plants has its own way, its own medicine of working, and tobacco has a very particular way, ayahuasca has a very particular way, peyote has a very particular way, et cetera, et cetera. Um, as you said, many people are familiar with tobacco. I mean, if you ask almost any person, they know what tobacco is, which is very different from something like perhaps ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Up until recently, if you ask someone what ayahuasca was, they would have no idea what you're talking about. That's starting to change, but um, I think that's actually a testament to the medicine of tobacco. There was a reason that if you ask anyone what is tobacco, they know what it is. And it was because when the Europeans, the African kind of the conquest, the meeting of the two worlds happened, is tobacco was the primary medicine plant. And so it was adopted very, very quickly, essentially by every culture that came into contact with it, because it was revered so highly. And so it was adopted very quick, and it proliferated very quickly. Even smoking wasn't the primary way that it was worked with traditionally. It was one of the ways that it was worked with traditionally, but not the primary way. And even when the kind of quote unquote two worlds met, smoking wasn't the primary way. It was often chewing or snuff. And then it developed more into smoking. And so today people know it more as smoking, which again is one of the ways you can work with tobacco. But tobacco is also a very interesting plant in that there's many ways you can administer it. You can smoke it, you can snort it, you can chew it, you can lick it, you can snort the powder, you can snort the liquid, you can drink it, you can do enemas with it. All of these things in general, it's super important that you don't do that without someone who really knows what they're doing, in the same way you wouldn't work with ayahuasca or any of these very strong plants without a doctor, because they are very strong plants. But it's a very versatile plant and it has many, many uses. And for many different reasons, the smoking aspect of tobacco spread very quickly, and so many people are familiar with it. It's probably something I could speak a long time about, but again, just in short, what most people know as tobacco. I mean, it's very fascinating. Even when you say tobacco, most people, what they would think about is a cigarette. They're not even thinking about a plant. They're not thinking about a green plant with beautiful white or pink or yellow flowers. They're thinking about a cigarette. So there's already a disconnect. Unfortunately, cigarettes, and probably not even in the beginning through malevolent intent, but in that era of adding chemicals and preservatives and fertilizers and all of these things, it became corrupted, and then probably to some degree there was a malevolence to adding certain chemicals that are addictive and can cause all sorts of other things. And now, in general, cigarettes contain, the number can be disputed, but it's hundreds. I think 800 chemicals in every cigarette, and when you combust that, it turns into thousands. So, for sure, smoking cigarettes with hundreds of added chemicals is not going to be ideal for you. In the same way of eating some packaged food that would have hundreds of chemicals in it is not ideal for you. And I think people are understanding that more, the deleterious nature of synthetic chemicals. And I think also a big part of why tobacco is misunderstood is because, and it's one of the, you could say, the problems or the issues that as these plants move out more to the mainstream that society is now facing, which is that if you become disconnected from the ancestral stories, from the ancestral uses, from the ancestral knowledge of how to work with these plants can corrupt. And it's not that the plant themselves are corrupting. It's that it's part of the nature of the human being, is that we can corrupt things. And so if those systems aren't in place, the stories, the knowledge, the dance, the traditions, all of that wisdom, if that's not there, we can enter unhealthy relationships to these plants. And that's not just tobacco. That can be said for ayahuasca. It can be said for San Pedro. It can be said for coca. It can be said to any of these strong plants. I think in general, those plants just haven't proliferated as quickly as tobacco has. But it's one of the very important things, and I think something that hopefully the more that these plants get out there, the more that we'll realize is that all of this ancestral wisdom is very, very important. I practice martial arts, and it's a very similar thing. If you just tried to practice a martial art, you wouldn't get very far. If you just tried to create your own martial art, you wouldn't get very far, and probably you would hurt yourself, and probably you would hurt other people also. There's so much knowledge already there. And so as Isaac Newton beautifully said, if I've seen further than others, it's only because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And it's very valuable, very vital to honor and to really, I think, go deeply into all of this ancestral wisdom, because it's literally generations, perhaps even eons of knowledge that we have access to and that can help us on our path.
And I love that part. And there's so much to unpack in what your little segment was here, because one, like the conversation around the master plant and the grandfather and tobacco. And like, yeah, we have this heritage in the United States. Like, we know what tobacco is. It's there. It's been there. But it just, then the thought of like using it from a humanity perspective in the way that it became, right? Became cigarettes and lots of chemicals. And we associate tobacco as being bad for you, but it's really all the crap that they put in it. And how it was introduced to us through the Native American component. And I love that place. There's so much in what you said. There was so much cool stuff because yes, these plants are there to help us move into these other realms, like to see these other dimensions. And now that's why I love blending the ancient wisdom with the modern science, because we could go down that rabbit hole of dimensions and interdimensionary spaces and multidimensional places. The shamans and the indigenous practices of thousands of years ago, like they inherently knew that. And now we're proving it on the other spectrum of the left brain side that says, quantum physics and multidimensional realities are a real thing, and string theory. Like, so it's like this and this have always been there. It's just we sort of moved through this cycle of understanding through our way of doing it. And so it mirrors that way that plants have already been there, and now we're seeing the other side of it. So I loved how you brought that in as, using these as tools, these teachers, like you said, these master teachers for us to explore not only our consciousness, but like getting to those deeper understandings about self and our interdimensional or interplay between us and nature and spirit. And it was just a beautiful way to express that. And I wanted to reemphasize, especially with the the listeners, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this podcast and other places, probably yours, of course, as well, is being in that right relationship, right? That relationship with the plants, not just using it as, what I would call like the green pill for the ill. You're just going to go do the drug and then you're going to be fixed. And there's some human side of that relationship where it's not revered. It's that old, like you said, like this is why I love studying indigenous wisdom and going all over the world studying with what already has been there for so long, is because they express this as part of the way, right? Is like, I think Westworld brains don't have that, and using it for our own way is like, let's make sure we have the right relationship with the medicine, because that's in essence on how it all interplays together rather than the substance itself. And I think you said it very beautifully, and I'm glad that we went through those parts, because having having these in the right relationship with each other and us is super critical and super important, because that is part of the process and why it's so important, compared to me coming from the westernized medicine where pharma, big food, big pharma, we're talking things in a very different light. And I think a lot of people have been programmed that way, not their fault, but been programmed in this way that says, all right, that thing's just doing your physical, like, chemistry. We're working with chemistry here, just the physicality of the body. And I think you and I kind of work in that agreement that it supersedes that. It goes beyond that. It goes through this whole component of energy and spirit. And I think the shamans of old, and then the shamans today, and the indigenous tribes and cultures have been ingrained in that for generations after generations, like you said, even thousands of years. So I think we're starting to understand that in a deeper level now in our own world, in our modern day world. But it's got that newness to it, because people haven't been culturally gone through that, generation after generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that. what drew you? It's mostly my curiosity. What drew you specifically to tobacco, knowing that you've had experience in other realms and ayahuasca and all these other places? It seems as though this is the one that called you. I want you to sort of talk to people through your experience of how that came about.
Well, when I found myself in the jungle and I began going deeper into this work, as I'm sure you're familiar with, and maybe some of your audience, there's kind of a generic term that's often used for some of these kind of panacea or these very universal ways of working. And in the jungle, there's a specific process which they call dieta.
Yeah, I wanted to go into this, so I'm glad you did. What is so talk to us about the dieta? How does it work? And explain us through that process, because you went through this deeply. So I want to give the listeners a really nice treat here, because this is really important, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, also, I can only speak from kind of my experience and the experience of those I've worked with, and for sure, there's people who've gone much deeper into dieta as well. But usually, it's a many-yeared experience. Certainly, for me, it was a process of on and off of now 15 years of dieting. Not obviously the entire 15 years, but significant portions of that, and Um, the idea behind a dieta, which you could loosely translate to diet, a plant. There's many ways of doing dieta, but they tend to embody certain archetypal things. Usually, it involves a process of isolating yourself, really from everyone except for your teacher, your physical teacher, the person in a human body who's giving you the medicine, who knows the medicine, who knows how to dose it, who understands the language of that world of those dimensionalities. What could be called a shaman, a healer. Um, usually even the word shaman or these more indigenous words, they tend to mean something like one who knows. In Spanish, they could be called a sabio, like a wise person, someone who has knowledge. For example, in the Shipibo, who you've worked with, there, someone who works with ayahuasca is called an unaya. And again, it means someone who knows, someone who has knowledge. And so you would go into a process of isolation, spending long periods. That could be anywhere from 1 week to 1 year, and and then usually a process of beginning to either fast or very severely restrict your food intake, so that essentially your body becomes very weakened. It's said that when your body is very weak, your spirit is very open. And so you're really weakening yourself, very often, even can be to the point of death, so that something is very open. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with this. If when people have been sick with the flu or something, and you're in bed and you're not eating, you're very weak, but you're also very open. You're often reflecting upon your life. You're thinking about all the things maybe you shouldn't have done or all the things you need to do. There can be a great clarity. There's often a great stillness that can come. So you're in isolation. You're restricting your food or fasting. Um, you're not taking in any sort of outside stimuli. So no reading, no watching anything. Like literally, you're doing nothing, which is a very big challenge in and of itself. And then finally, you're ingesting one particular plant. And the idea is one, to experience potentially physical healing from that plant. So we can do a dieta for some physical ailment that we're coming for, because again, through the process of the dieta, through all of these things I mentioned, the medicine has a much deeper ability to penetrate and to really heal, as opposed to just taking a plant or a pharmaceutical and not changing anything else. And again, this isn't a very foreign concept. I mean, I think most people would realize, even if you're taking a pharmaceutical or some natural medicine, you can compound the healing by altering a lot of other things in your life as well. And then the final thing is usually that plant is administered through some other master plant. That could be tobacco, that could be ayahuasca. Very traditionally, it was via tobacco. Um, it was said that tobacco again was the first plant, and it's often said the tobacco is the food of the spirits of the plants. And so when you ingest something with tobacco, you allow yourself to begin to enter those other dimensions, or maybe from a Western point of view, you allow yourself at least to enter the dream space. And it's said that tobacco is the plant of the shaman because it allows you to have a foot in both worlds. It allows you to have a foot in this reality, but it allows you to have a foot in the shamanic realm or the dream space. We all dream every night. We're all being tested and going through obstacles and doing all sorts of things every night, but very rarely do we remember it, and very rarely do we remember it for much time. Even if we remember it briefly in the morning, it's usually quite fleeting. And very rarely do we reflect on it. Very rarely are we guided by that. So with tobacco and having a foot in both of these worlds, all of that dream space is completely open and all of that knowledge is present. So it's working in this liminal or hypnagogic state so that we can think we're dreaming, but we actually realize we're awake, or we think we're awake and we realize we're dreaming. So the lines between those different dimensions becomes very blurred. And so everything is seen as information. Everything can be taken and worked with. And so in the dieta, because we're very open, we're very sensitive, we're highly attuned because nothing else is coming in except the information of this one particular plant that we're working with. Usually these plants in many of these traditions are trees, because trees are seen as these very great teachers. They physically represent the three dimensionalities of the underworld, the lived world, the spirit world, the three dimensions of time and space. They even kind of look, if you look at it, it's rooted into the earth, and then the trunk is growing straight and strong, and then it's branching into the sky, into the heavens. Trees are very old. They're much older than us. You can have trees that are even thousands of years old. So that's thousands of years of wisdom that's embodied in that tree. And it's seen the trees much like if you were thinking of like a university. Every one of these trees is like a specific subject. It's a specific doctor. It has specific medicine. And we know that trees have medicine. I mean, even someone may correct me, but I think it's still something like 70% of pharmacological medicine is plant derived. A lot of it is synthesized now, but still the vast majority of our pharmaceutical medicine is plant derived. And trees were considered the kind of the highest, you could say, form of those teachers. Even often what's considered the first pharmaceutical drug was aspirin, and that was derived from salicylic acid, salicin, that's found in the willow tree. And in many cultures where the willow tree grew, it was considered a very sacred teacher, a very sacred tree plant. So in the dieta, we're also working on these three levels. There's a physical healing that's taking place. So you could be prescribed a certain plant or tree for some condition that you have, maybe inflammation or liver disease or heart disease or irritable bowel syndrome or anything, any disease that's out there. Theoretically, there's a cure for it. It's also working on the second level, which is the mind and the emotions. So a lot of people come with traumas or anxieties or depressions or what could be seen as illnesses of the mind. And then the third level is what would be called the realm of spirit. And this is the much deeper essence of who we are. Um, and in many of these traditions, we often look at it kind of going upward. Kind of the physical is the most important, and to some degree, maybe the mental, emotional. And then often we don't even really consider this idea of spirit, or spirit is something else, something that's for churches or religion, but it's not related to our healing or to our wisdom. in a lot of these traditions, it's kind of the inverse of this, that everything starts in the realm of spirit. And when our spirit is out of balance, it's this idea of like soul retrieval or weaving our spirit back together. It's this idea that it's fragmented, that the pieces aren't all there. They're missing. Or if you maybe look at like um, photographs of frozen water, you see that maybe the structure isn't quite perfect. And so it's this idea that as we begin to bring that into wholeness, then our mind begins to become more clear, more whole. And as our mind becomes more clear and whole, our body becomes more clear and whole. And so this is the dieta. And through that dieta, we have a chance to directly experience the healing and the teaching from these plants. And predominantly that comes through the dream space at night. And again, because we're not doing anything, through this waking dream space throughout the entire day. And it's usually coming in these very subtle messages. Very specifically through contemplation, through the dream space, through observance of nature, through observance of the mind. We really begin to learn about ourselves and about the nature of these plants. And through that process, we begin to form these allyships with these plants, and we begin to learn their medicine, their physical medicine, the emotional medicine, and the spiritual medicine. And kind of a bit of a long answer, but to go back to your initial question, why tobacco? I don't know exactly why, but something about tobacco always very much called me. And eventually I found, or he found me, but a teacher who specialized in tobacco. And I felt very called to that plant. I felt very called to him, to the way he was working, to who he was. And so I entered a long apprenticeship with him of doing many diets with him, studying under his tutelage. Um, One of the things I actually very much like about a lot of these traditions is they aren't so much spoken traditions. It's more the experiences. It's seeing that the plants are the real teachers. And secondarily is the physical teacher themselves to really begin to pass on to you the things that are more of this world, the technical knowledge, the know-how, the dosing, all of the more technical things, which is very important. But also that the essence of all of this work is coming directly to you from these plants. And so I ended up doing that process. I was still working with ayahuasca. Kind of once I really started to do that apprenticeship, I stopped all of the ayahuasca work. I really dedicated myself to that. After I finished that, I ended up going back to ayahuasca and kind of having this balance. And the reason I started working with that was, I think, again, very organic. I never had the desire to do that work. It was very foreign to me. To be honest, it was a very strange world in a lot of ways. But in that process of dieting, at one point, I remember feeling actually quite sad that he was the only person who I had really found. And I lived in the Amazon for a long time, but the only person who I really felt had a deep connection to that medicine. And I felt that medicine needed to be passed on, and yet I didn't see other people doing it. And so it was kind of this message that, well, if you don't do it, then who else will? And but still, even with that, I didn't have the idea of actually doing this work. It was maybe, I don't know, writing something about it or sharing it, maybe doing a ceremony here or there. But slowly, people started coming, and it just slowly began to be my work. But all of it was very very organic. And maybe to you this won't sound so strange, and to some of your listeners, to some it may, but I think as we begin to do this work, or really anything, it doesn't have to be this work, but this work very much opens us up to that space that we've kind of generically been referring to as spirit. Is we do begin receiving guidance, messages, clarity, in often very non-rational ways. But at some point, we can write it off as coincidence or just ramblings of the mind. But that's a certain way of living, and that way has certain good things, and it has certain drawbacks as well. And I think at a certain point for people, the other way of looking at the world, that these things are connected, that there is guidance, that there is wisdom, that there are messages from however we want to look at it, from God, from spirit, from our own innate intuition or intelligence. And that as we begin to be guided by that, the way that the world is looked at, is seen, is created, takes on a very different shape. And so a lot of this process for me, I think was very much guided by what I was speaking about.
Yeah, it's they're just beautifully spoken. I love how you talked about the dieta as not as like a body, mind, and spirit, and looking at it from one avenue of going from body, mind, maybe spirit if you're lucky, and then the indigenous or shamanic ways where everything starts with spirit, starts with energy. It moves itself down into body, and now we're talking quantum physics and quantum realities in that same space of the vibrational energies moving down to the slowest form. So again, I love the interweaving of this ancient wisdom and also the modern day world, and learning through experience. Like when you said that, that's how I like to teach now. I don't like to teach through the science and the knowing and like or the intelligence of all of it. It's like or the intellect. It's more of that learning through your experience. And I love how that apprenticeship becomes that, and how I have such a reverence for people that go through that experience and have spent and dedicated that not only time but energy in the process, because it's very different in the West world. We want it yesterday. We want it into a 15-minute, 2-minute video, get certified, go, right? It's like, no, there's this beautiful wisdom through the timing of the divine timing of the experience. And I don't think a lot of people understand uh the amount of, I don't want to call it effort, but the time it takes for that, right? It's very different than in our world where we want to go, go, go. So I'm glad that you brought it up and you gave people a glimpse of that experience. It's beautiful. So thank you for that. And thank you for going through that and doing that. So this is your work now. This is what you do. You bring people through this experience.
Yes, yeah, very similar to the experience I went through. I guide people through that as well. Also, it's one of the things. Like obviously, we're all different people, so it's as I was saying, this idea of like Isaac Newton of standing on the shoulder of giants. That's why I think it's so important is that we take all of that knowledge, that wisdom, we learn it, we can apply it, and then we hopefully can add something of our own to it, something of our own life experience, because we are all different people. We have different experiences of life, of cosmovisions, of ways of seeing the world. Um, I studied in a very particular Amazonian tradition. I mean, actually, a few Amazonian traditions, and they're beautiful. So much knowledge. And also, I'm not Amazonian. If anyone is looking at the video version of that, they can probably see. But I come from more of a Western world, although my story is maybe a bit complex as well. But I'm familiar with that Western mind, and so also I think part of my role is also I think what can generically be said is this idea of bridge keeping. And
Yeah.
it's why also most of the people who come to me are Western people, so it's helpful to be able to see, to understand the world through that lens, through their culture, through the programming and the beauty and the sometimes not so beautiful aspects of it. and to be able to bridge another cosmovision, another worldview that was taught to me directly, that was also shared with me, and to be able to weave that together. Um, Also, all of the training I did obviously was with Amazonian trees, with Amazonian plants, because that's who all of my teachers were. And at a certain point, I ended up leaving the Amazon. It was actually during the pandemic. It got quite bad there, and I ended up going up to an area of Peru called the Sacred Valley, which was just a bit more open and a better place for me to be during that time. And I also worked with a woman, and we got invited to travel, and we ended up going to New York, which I lived in New York for a long time, and I grew up in Virginia. So, and even when we were in the Sacred Valley, because if people are familiar with Peru, I mean, even though they're very close, they're very different
Yeah.
atmospheres. I mean, very different flora and fauna. So, very few Amazonian trees do you find in the mountains of Peru. And so we were still, even though it wasn't physically that far away, it wasn't the trees that we were actually living with. And so we'd still have to go to the Amazon to get these trees and then to work with them. So then we also became interested in working with a few of the more local trees there, and going through a process of dieting some of those. And then we were invited to work in New York, and for me it was very beautiful because it was very much like a coming home, and
Mhm.
taking this technology and this way of working, but being in this land that I was very familiar with. But I saw all of these trees around me that I was familiar with, and I knew them, but I didn't know them in the same way that I knew these Amazonian trees, because I hadn't worked with them experientially. But I knew their stories, I knew their smells, I knew their physical medicines, and almost this may sound strange, but I almost felt like they were lonely, or maybe I was lonely, because they weren't being worked with in this way that I'm sure at some point they were being worked with, because I think that knowledge was lost in those lands. And that was kind of the first idea, to begin kind of bridging this work in the same way that we're bridging cultures, but to bridge the actual medicines of the medicines that are more local to where people are from. And then I think one of the big kind of tipping points is we were also invited to work in Ireland, and Ireland was very special for us because I very much felt that there still was a remnants of this indigenous, this more traditional way of working with trees, this Celtic way, this Druidic way. Ireland is still full of people who have a lot of knowledge of the medicine trees and plants, and the rites and the rituals, and making payments to the elves or the fairies to be on their good side, and speaking about the spirits of trees, and even this traditional language, the Ogham language. Every letter corresponds to a tree. The letter D is der, which is oak, and that's where the English word door comes from, because door was the made of oak, and the door was the entrance to the house, to be entranced, to enter another realm, and that's part of the medicine of oak. And so all of this, there's still traces of that, and what I saw was really the same cosmovision that I had learned and experienced in the Amazon. They were speaking of spirits and other entities, and fairies, and these helper allies, and the spirits of trees. And so then that really inspired us to begin working much more with these European or American, North American trees. And so, still working in the same system, the same technology, via the medium of tobacco, to really connect people through all of this knowledge, this wisdom, this technical aspect, this technology that we've been gifted with, but also really beginning to connect people with trees from where they come, and the wisdom of that. And so that's been a very, very beautiful aspect of our work, and one of the ways in which our work has kind of shifted and molded over time.
Yeah, you said, and it's part of, I've gone on your website and looking at it, it's like that's where that Celtic tree wisdom comes in, and you're kind of blending that into the fold. So it's how beautiful of a story of being invited to work and then experiencing how these traditions, although they seem very different in nature when you're looking at exploring them from this spiritual aspect of the trees and their wisdom and the medicine that they bring. But at the same time, there's all these connectors, right? It's all those connectors that they're doing. So it's so this is why I love going to all different places studying these things, because there's so many common beautiful threads, and in the, like you said, in the wisdom in which they've been taught it, and in their traditions, because they are their traditions, because they've been passed down generation after generation and geographically, and they also carry that same timeless wisdom that they all have. So it's this both and approach that I love that you express that, because and I love these episodes where I have my list of thoughts that I want to ask, and then they organically come out anyway. So I was going to ask you about your the Celtic tree wisdom and how you bring it into your fold. So you did that. So thank you. Um, you have a online and an in person treat like retreat center, right? You do a little bit of both with people.
Well, most of our work, I mean, actually, up until recently, all of our work was in person. Um, People would come to us anywhere from 1 to usually 3 weeks, and diet, working with trees, working with in this way via this medium of tobacco. Um, Recently, we've started working a little bit more online, more remotely. It's
Okay.
something we're starting to explore a little bit. It's usually more with our students, because we also offer people, people who've begun working with us, a kind of apprenticeship, and usually they have a bit more of a sensitivity and openness, and so it's something we've been exploring the last few years, and uh, we've been very, I would say, pleasantly surprised with the results, that even working at a distance, we're able to connect people to these plants in the same way. But it's something we're still kind of in the early stages of exploring. We do it, but yeah, it's most of our work is still in person, although the remote aspect is beginning to gain a bit more momentum as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important too, because there is obviously an aspect of why there's such more. There's just this beautiful experience when you're unplugged and you're doing it in person, and it's just like Zoom versus in person. Well, Zoom's better than nothing, but the in person, there's so much more energy in that. So, what's the name of your retreat center, and how do people find it?
Probably the easiest way is the website, which is nicotianarustica.org. Nicotiana rustica is the Latin name of a particular tobacco. Nicotiana is tobacco, and rustica is like a wild tobacco or jungle tobacco that we work with. So there's a website, and also on Instagram, just my name at Jason Grechanik, and we keep that updated pretty regularly as well.
We'll post those links so people can see them and be able to click and move through them. Are you when's your next retreat?
We have actually, interestingly, our first kind of group virtual remote diet that's happening next week. And then after that, November 2nd, we have a month-long retreat in the Sacred Valley of Peru.
Very cool. Yeah, we want to make sure people know how to get more information and understand that process a little bit if it speaks to them and understands that, because I think what you're doing and the work that you're embodying through your experience and through your training is so needed and so wonderful, because it brings us back to our that relationship that we have with these beautiful teaching plants, nature, and trees. Because we say it, like we say this in our Westworld brains, like, oh, just get out in nature, and like just be in nature and do these things. But like there's such a deeper component to that I think when you explore in the way that you've described it, in the way that the traditional methods of dietas and diets and getting in that right relationship with yourself, but also with God, universe, spirit, whatever you want to call that, um, is so impactful for us and moving through. What are some of the, just so people know, like, what are some of the things you've seen people going from, let's just say, like, they come to you for this and then they end up here, like, not like clinical outcomes, but like, what have you seen in your work where these, because I love stories of transformation. I love bringing people to understand that empowering yourself through these methodologies and these ways is truly powerful. It's truly healing, and it's very transformational. Like, this whole podcast is about healing and transformation. That's all I love to do for the rest of my life too, because I've got that innate knowing now, and I've been called. I love where you talked about the bridge keepers, and we had one episode the other day where someone's like, I love helping the bridge builders build. And it's like, there's this space that you have this calling to be in both realms and to show people through the West. Because I had a conversation with one of a friend of mine who is a beautiful post-tribal shaman, spent his whole life in that realm. And we had the same conversation yesterday about talking about the bridge builders and how we're moving into the space, and where the indigenous tribes and the shamans are focusing on the West, and they're bringing this to the West. So there's this bridge between the ancient world and this modern space. And I feel like you've eloquently expressed that calling that you have, that we have shared the vision for that. But I want you to talk a little bit about maybe a couple anecdotes or stories where people have taken that leap, or taken that step into the unknown, and what it's done for them. Because I think that's important for people to understand. It's not that it's going to do it for you, but when we open up awareness to possibility, it really does help people.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's another big one. Um, you know, I would say a lot of our even what we could say are our problems or imbalances is this kind of reductionist way of thinking. And so even when we say things of like the Western world, which I also use that terminology, you know, we say that because it allows the mind to somehow compartmentalize, to try and make sense of the world, to understand. And there's something very beautiful about that. But as you said, that kind of more maybe whatever left brain or right brain idea of that, um, it's also dividing. And part of, I think, what a lot of these traditions all over the world are pointing to is that essentially is what we were speaking about, is everything starts in the realm of spirit, and spirit is oneness, or you could even look at it as beyond oneness. Even oneness is already a division, but it's this idea of something that's primary, that's whole.
Oh, yeah.
And the split of that, the split into duality, is the manifested world. And it's the world that we all live in. And it's beautiful and amazing and terrifying and horrible and amazing and incredible and all of these things. Um, but that's also where a lot of our suffering comes from. Even in the cultures that we come from, that's the archetypal story of the fall from grace, the exiting of the Garden of Eden, the Adam and Eve, the serpent of the tree. Interestingly, again, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's what separates or facilitates the fall into this world of duality. And so it's often said that all of us are longing to return home. And even in a lot of these traditions, they would say that working with these plants is a process of remembering on a deeper level who we are, in our most fundamental nature and where we come from. And these plants help us to remember that. Um, and so when we speak of the Western world, I mean, really what we're speaking about is the entire world. I mean, the entire world, maybe minus a half a percentage of the population now. I mean, almost everyone is of the Western world. Even a lot of indigenous people, it was often something very interesting, even probably as you went to the Temple of the Way of Light. I mean, all of the traditional Shipibo people there, when they leave the temple and they go into the city, they're wearing shorts and skirts and t-shirts, and they have their cell phones, and they're also of that world now. And yet they also carry this ancestral knowledge. But that Western world has really encompassed the modern mind. And and so this process is a process of remembering, and we're all going to come to this work with who we are, with where we're at in this world. And that's why these plants are going to affect people very differently. I'm sure, as you saw at your time at the Temple of the Way of Light, there's 23 people in a ceremony. Everyone has a different story. Everyone gets something very different out of a medicine like ayahuasca, often vastly different.
Yeah.
From seemingly nothing happening to one person speaking to God, to one person going into their childhood trauma, their abuse of their father, to one person having a miraculous physical healing. There's so much that can happen. And so some of that is obviously what you're coming with, who you are, what your intention is, where your mind is at, what other work have you done prior to that. And then some is beyond all of that, because all of that is still somehow of the rational mind. Even if you're coming and you're like, I want this, or like, I know something really needs to be worked on and this is what I want, maybe that's given to you. But maybe there's also a higher intelligence at work that realizes that there's actually something even beyond or above or below that that needs to be worked on, that eventually will allow this thing to happen. Or maybe it's seen that that's actually not even that important, that that thing actually even begins to fall away when something else is worked on. So in terms of things that can happen, it can be anything from people have come down and they have bones that are out of place, that are healed, to um, very common, I would say, these days are things like depression, feeling of lack of vitality, lack of purpose, and being reanimated, seeing the vitality of life again, understanding that all of these stories that they've been telling themselves are perhaps not true, that there's a deeper wisdom that someone can begin to be gifted. Um, to digestive ailments, because again, all of these things are connected. I mean, if you study any traditional system, if you have a liver disease, let's take the Chinese way of looking at it. Liver would be connected to anger, or you have a stomach issue, you have ulcers, it could be connected to worry, or you're suffering from asthma. There's very potentially grief there. And so whatever it is you're coming physically, probably you're going to go into the emotional aspect of that as well. And that's what we were talking about, these three levels. And then at some point you're going to go even to something that's deeper than that, something that's beyond the stories, that's trying to transcend you, even to begin to let those things go, because there's a power in understanding the stories. There's a wisdom in understanding the stories, but there's still an attachment to something. And so something can be seen from a higher vantage point that allows these things to begin to dissolve. And I would say in the most fundamental levels, again, this work is really helping people to remember on a deeper level who they are and where they come from. And so, something that may sound very simple, but someone receives a communication from a spirit, or they're traveling to another realm and they realize there's a guide there or a helper, and they're thinking, well, that's not really what I came for. And yet then they see, like, oh my God, like, this world is so much more vast, so much more layered than I ever thought. And it gives them again that curiosity, that zest for life, that knowing that all of the things that they're coming with, whether it's physical or mental, emotional, there's again other ways of looking at things. And then that leads them to something deeper and something deeper. And so sometimes people come for one dieta. Very often people will come back because whatever they came to work on has alleviated, but it's left a curiosity, much like in myself, to go deeper. And it's always where we're at, what we're looking for, to what degree can we say I'm happy, I'm content, I'm whole. Even as we kind of mentioned in the beginning, maybe bringing this full circle, like this idea um, of the value of these traditions, and a big part of that is this idea, even in like our Greek or Western traditions, there's this idea of Lady Liberty or Lady Justice, and it's the woman with the scale. And people, I think, often don't think about that, the deeper meaning behind that, because that's what dis-ease is. Dis-ease is when something is imbalanced,
Mm-hmm.
something is out of balance. And to be healed means to be whole. It means to be whole, to be in integrity. That's even this idea of integration, to bring something into wholeness. And that's what health is. That's what wellness is. It's to be whole, to not be out of balance. And so when something is out of balance, there's a dis-ease, there's an imbalance. And so part of our work is to bring ourselves back into balance. And a big part of that, again, as we were saying, was not just the physical. It's in a lot of these indigenous traditions, they speak about this idea of reciprocity or making a payment, an energetic payment of doing something, because these medicines can give us a tremendous amount, in general, far more than probably the effort that we need to expend. But they do ask us of something, and they ask us to bear a certain responsibility, to take action. So the archetypal ideas of yin and yang or wu wei, the action and inaction. And so a big part of this process is the receptivity, the allowing, the more archetypal feminine. But then part is the archetypal masculine, the doing, the bringing order, the actioning, the beginning to structure our lives in a way that's in accordance to what these plants are giving us. And so that's a big idea. This aspect of reciprocity, of making payments, of giving back, of not just taking, but of giving. And everyone's going to do that in a different way because we're all different. To some people, that may be planting a tree. To some people, that may be volunteering at a homeless shelter. For someone, that may be becoming a parent. For someone, it may just be being a nicer person when you're waiting in line at the grocery store, when anger comes up, instead of acting on that, saying to the cashier who forgot to charge the thing correctly, you say, "Oh, that's okay. Sorry. Thank you." There's so many ways that we begin to do this, but ultimately, uh, these plants are transforming us. And one of the things is that we don't see these plants or these trees often on the same level as humans because they're very different. They're not moving at our pace. They're not speaking in our language. They have a very different way of being. And yet the spirit, the essence is beyond all of that. And in that wisdom of, the tree can affect the person that it gives its medicine to. The person can then affect everyone that he or she gives their medicine to. And so, in that way, I think that the highest work we can do is to then really begin to embody the medicine of those trees and to bring that out. And so, I guess to kind of wrap up and to answer your question, so many things can happen. So many things in the realm of physical healing, of mental, emotional healing, of spiritual connection come, and then it's up to us how we embody that, how we bring that reciprocity out, and to really begin to embody the wisdom of these plants, of these trees. And that's a personal journey that's going to depend on every person. And probably to some degree the success of what happens is to some degree based on on that aspect.
Yeah, beautifully said, for sure. You know, we talked about body, mind, and spirit, leading with the spirit and the energetics and reciprocity and paying that forward in such ways and learning about these things on these deeper levels and these deeper planes and merging them into those spaces. So thank you so much for this. This was a great conversation, Jason. I no doubt know that we'll be connecting on other levels, uh, sharing and swapping stories and referring people back and forth, because this is the true essence of the medicine when we talk about it this way. And you've given me a lot of insights today as well. Um, Check him out on his website. I'm going to butcher it, nicotianarustica.org. And on Instagram, Jason Grechanik. Check him out. I think this is awesome. I'm really looking forward to diving in a little bit more on these topics and learning a little more on myself. And appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for showing up, what you're doing, staying true to your authenticity and your wholeness and your passions, because this is such a needed space and this needed work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for giving me this time and space, and thank you for all you're doing of bringing voices out. And I look forward to keeping in touch. So thank you very much.
Well, that's a wrap, guys. This was a fun, beautiful, just enlightening episode. So I'm so glad that we were able to connect. Until next time, everyone, stay well. Thanks for joining me today on Beyond the Pills. If our mission to de-prescribe 10 million unnecessary medications resonates with you, share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review. Whether you're a practitioner or someone ready to reclaim your health, visit rx2wellness.com for free resources to begin your journey. Together, let's go beyond the pills and co-create a world of vibrant health and true healing. Until next time, live better and stay well.